everybody, this is the Wikstrand. So, it was the 1950s and Hollywood started to realize that there was a decline in number of people who wanted to go to the movies. They were trying different things to try to entice people to go to the cinemas again. They tried with, the release of 3D movies, which was just a gimmick and didn't really work at all. But they also tried something else. To make these enormous blockbusters with big stars and a huge spectacles. So huge, in fact, that you just had to see them in the cinemas. Otherwise, they would lose all their lusters. And my opinion of these movies, which were usually, these sword and sandal epics that were, 3 hours plus sometimes, is a little bit all over the place. We do have the really good ones, such as Spartacus. We have the pretty good ones that, still kind of lack something, like, the fall of the Roman Empire. We have the ones that is a little bit overrated and way too long, like Ben-Hur, and the movies that were, almost unwatchable, such as, Quo Vadis. Which one is my favorite of all of these movies? It is actually a movie that has nothing to do with the Roman Empire. We are going to take a look today of what I would consider one of the best historical dramas that has been made, in this time period. Maybe the best of them all. This is my review of El Cid. Spain, 1080. There is unrest in the country, and the Moors and the Spanish are basically, at each other's throats at the moment, which suits Abu Sayyaf very nicely. He's a fierce African warlord who is going to create a global jihad. His idea is basically to have infighting within the Spanish kingdoms, and when they are at its weakest, he's going to take his enormous fleet and come and invade the Iberian Peninsula and then the world, essentially, and converting them all to Muslims. Now, this is something that Rodrigo de Vivier is unaware of. He, played by Charlton Heston, is just going to meet his bride, Jemania, played by Sophia Loren. And he, meets a bunch of emirs from, the Moors who has been captured after, a raid on a village. And he, at first wants to hang them, as would be custom to do, or maybe, demand ransom for them. But he chose to do neither of these things. Instead, he opts to release them under the condition that they will swear allegiance to the King of Spain. And when they do, he releases them. This act of tolerance and valor gives him the name El Cid among the Moors. But it doesn't sit very well with the king, who accuses him of treason. He's going to stand trial. And the problem is that Jimne's father and El Cid's father, Don Diego, have some harsh words for each other, and as Roy Burgundy would say, that escalated quickly, and then El Cid has actually killed Jimne's father, and now she hates him and wants him dead. So the bride-to-be and the groom now has a situation where they absolutely hate each other. Can this relationship, be mended somewhat? At the same time as this is happening, we also have infighting within, the Spanish crowns, where, different cities and different provinces, declare themselves independent, or, wants to rule themselves and stuff like that. And because, her father was, the king's champion, this creates a bit of an, problem for the Spanish crowns. So is Sayyaf going to be able to, launch his big invasion. And you know, when the king dies, we have, you know, these two princes and the princess who is, you know, fighting among each other for, you know, control and stuff like that. So we have a lot of plot to get through before the fantastic ending of this movie. Now, El Cid is such a Boy Scout, and he's such a voice for reason and tolerance and valor and chivalry that if anybody else would have played him except Charlton Heston, this would not have worked, because he would have, you know, been viewed as too much of a pushover and too much of an, you know, idealistic character. But because Charlton Heston is such a badass, and he's able to combine his alpha male badassery with this noble valor knight character, and it works. I also love the fact that the relationship between him and Sophia Loren is important enough that it, you know, is important to the story, but it doesn't, you know, is allowed to take up too much of screen time, and it doesn't go into the classical soap opera thing that, you know, this movie could have been the victim of. I love the characters in this movie. I really like, you know, the setup. The sets looks great. The battle sequences looks surprisingly good. They have an intensity and a rawness to itself that other sword and sandal movies, you know, and the big historical blockbusters lacks. You know, it's not like, you know, they're having blood and gore and stuff like that, even though I think this movie could have benefited a lot from having an R rating if such a thing would have existed in the early 1960s. You really care what's going to happen to the characters, and because we have, you know, political intrigues and betrayal and jealousy and backstabbing and all sorts of nice and wonderful things, we always have something going on. This movie has a remarkably good pace for being such an old movie as it is. And whenever you think you know what's going to happen, they throw you a little curveball which makes you go, oh, I didn't see that thing coming. All of these things leading up to the fantastic ending, the Battle of Valencia, which itself has, you know, something that has campfire tales and folklore things written all over it. Now, I am not an expert on Spanish history, and I am not an expert on El Cid's history. It is a character who has actually existed for real. But I would take a pretty wild guess that they have exaggerated some stuff, and they have, you know, made the whole thing a little bit more melodramatic and epic and awesome, just so we could get that fantastic ending when the character of El Cid essentially goes into mythological status. Now, there is some problems with this movie, and most of these problems has to do with the fact that they don't have enough time. They rush stuff sometimes, and the really, really interesting bits, like, you know, the palace intrigues and the squabblings among the you know, prince and the princess and the sieges that happens, is not explored enough. For instance, we have this time jump in the middle of the movie where approximately 10 years have passed, and, you know, Charlton Heston has got himself an awesome salt and pepper beer and a badass scar right across his face. How did he get that? And, you know, what happened in, you know, these 10 years? We never figured that thing out. He was just, you know, ostracized, and then he's sort of still ostracized, but what did he do during those 10 years? We never got the answer to that. That kind of annoyed me a little bit. It might sound insane to say that a movie that is over 3 hours long simply doesn't have enough time, but that is actually the case. You can also argue probably that Abu Sayyaf is not a very compelling villain, looking and sounding more like a combination of a 60s Batman villain, a Bond villain, and something from South Park. The description of the African invaders is also not maybe the most balanced thing I've ever seen, and some people might take offense to the fact that we have a bit of brown facing going on in the same way that Alec Guinness did in Lawrence of Arabia, but I will let that thing slide because simply enough it's a very good performances and their characters are so compelling that I am willing to let that thing slide. Also, it was the, you know, style of the time, so it's not a big problem for me. For some people it might be, but not for me. This is Charlton Heston's show almost from the get-go. He's a vastly underrated actor, and I think he puts on one of his best performances ever in this movie. And him and Sophia Loren has fantastic chemistry together, and you really feel that, you know, the relationship is a, you know, vital part of this movie. Sophia Loren is great, Herb Loom is great as Ben Yusuf, and everybody else does a pretty damn good job in this movie. It is big, it is epic, it is spectacular, not quite as spectacular as a Cleopatra, but on the other hand, it handles the story with more care, and they take better advantage of the story that has been given to them. This is the type of thing I think could have been an excellent miniseries, or even a, you know, two-part, you know, a big spectacle directed by Ridley Scott or something like that. But if you've never seen El Cid, I really recommend this movie. This is a big, fun, entertaining, epic spectacle of the type that, you know, they don't really do anymore. Great characters, good actors, good writing, and a sweeping scope that you will only find in the early 1960s. If you've never seen this movie, do see it. Of the other, you know, big epics that was made during this time, I can only really with a good conscience recommend Spartacus. Every other, you know, big spectacle from this area is either quite okay or a bit overrated and too long for their own good. But this movie, I think the pace made the runtime work for them to the point where you actually wanted more, not less, when the whole thing was said and done. Is there, you know, some bits that doesn't quite work? Yeah, there is also a couple of sequences that may be a little dodgy, and I would suspect that the historical accuracy in this movie might not be perfect, but I'm willing to let that thing slide because I just thought that the rest of the movie was so good that I'm willing to accept it. This is what I want from a big Hollywood spectacle of this type. I give El Cid 84 points. It may not have the excess as some other movies in the same genre has, like Ben-Hur or Cleopatra, but it has a better focus on the story, and they have a better story to work with, and they use it in a better way. That's why I think it is, with some margin, the best of the bunch. So what do you think about El Cid? Comment below, and I'll see you next time from, well, so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.